Hey there, welcome to another Biblical History on the Go. So today we're actually going to talk about the Whore of Babylon and the dragon on which she sits. So the Whore of Babylon is a concept in the book of Revelation only. We'll get there. Not necessarily just the book of Revelation, but it is first highlighted in the book of Revelation as a prophetic vision, or part of a prophetic vision given to a disciple of Jesus by the name of John, not John the Baptist. John the Baptist was beheaded. This was another disciple named John. This was after he was tortured, essentially, an attempted murder on his life, which did not succeed. Multiple instances, which are not documented in the Bible, but they are documented in extra biblical communications, as many of the deaths and martyrs of the disciples were. So this John was exiled after 2 attempts to kill him did not succeed, but he was an old man by that point. So they exiled him to the island of Patmos, which is an island off the shores of Greece. And here he was worshiping one day, and he received a vision. And this is the entire book of Revelation. The revelation of Jesus Christ is what it's called in its full name. So John received this vision, and if you look at it, the first 5 chapters are messages, essentially, specifically to the churches, the 7 churches, which are basically just the world, the churches, the people, the body of Christ, everyone who believes in Christ. At that point in time, they had established 7 churches, and if you want to look into like the ecumenical councils, this is what's going on, or where they came from. The idea being, it's hard to manage a single message amongst lots of defining bodies of people in other countries. So initially, the 12 disciples of Jesus handled that and tried to establish the groundwork and teach people about what they learned from Jesus. They taught people. Paul also became part of that in teaching the Gentiles, and they communicated with people that they made leaders, so that everyone was always on the same page. This is why most of the New Testament is letters, also known as epistles, to the churches, to let them know where they were messing up, what they were hearing was wrong or whatever, to give them correction, reproof, to give them encouragement, and to teach. And so that's where the 7 churches come. So the first 5 books, chapters in Revelation are about the churches. And then chapters 6 through 11 get into the 7 seals and the 7 vials, which we'll cover in another video. But chapter 12 and on is more of a prophetic vision. Somewhere in between, we're basically within like that whole end scene there. We get an image, a sign in heaven that appears, another sign, and it's this woman who is drunk on the blood of the saints, wearing really rich clothing, and she's appears to be royal, and she's drunk on the blood of the saints. She's got a cup, and in it is blood. She's drunk on this blood, and she's sitting on top of a dragon. And if you've seen the other videos, you might want to jump to the conclusion and say, well, that's the devil. No, this is not a depiction of the entity of the devil. This is a prophetic, which means also symbolic, instance. It's a symbolic vision of something, because it's also considered a mystery. So this woman, drunk on the blood of the saints, because it calls that out, is sitting on a dragon with 7 heads. And this dragon, that on which she sits, represents something just as much as she does. So John asks someone in heaven, an angel, what does this mean? He tells them this is a mystery. On her forehead is written, Mystery Babylon the Great. And if you've listen to, actually, Avenged Sevenfold has an album called City of Evil. The name Avenged Sevenfold is a reference to Genesis, referencing Lamech, I think his name was supposedly a distant uncle or something, or a grandfather of Cain. The Cain and Abel story of Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother, gets this mark. So the idea was that Cain lived forever, and Lamech ended up killing him somehow, and was afraid that his curse would be even greater, because God promised that anyone who tried to kill Cain would be cursed. Anyways, that's where they get their name. But their album City of Evil, while it is explicit, the premise of basically the entire album is about Revelation and the horsemen and the whore of Babylon and the city of evil. Not from a Christian perspective, certainly not. Definitely from the other end of the perspective, essentially from the perspective of evil, the perspective of the devil, which is a very interesting take, and certainly something that brings lots of things to question as far as media, but for a Christian should provoke thought about perspective. Anyways, the Whore of Babylon, you may have heard it from music, from folklore. People typically know about the idea. They don't know where it's from. They don't know the story of it. They don't know the information about it. So we're going to get into that here. In fact, I'm going to reveal to you the mystery of Babylon. I'm going to tell you exactly who the Whore of Babylon represents. I'm going to tell you exactly who the dragon with 7 heads represents. And I'm going to tell you what it means by drunk on the blood of the saints. I'm going to point out to you exactly where in the Bible you can find this information for yourself. Because again, this is not an opinion that I'm providing, just as most of the stuff that I say in these videos are not my opinions. They are all references that I've found biblically in multiple areas, because in none of these videos, if you look at anything that I've said, these things are not simply one verse that I'm taking out of context. There are tons of verses that cooperate specific contexts and topics, and this is one of those. So the Whore of Babylon is probably the biggest mystery to people today, well, besides the name of the Antichrist, number 666. But the idea of the Whore of Babylon is that if we knew who it was, we would know what country or what people to avoid, or what people are evil, or what, it's this idea that this is a group of people that are going to end up killing the Christians in the Great Tribulation. Lots of different varying ideas around it. But the reality is, she represents something much deeper than a future struggle, but represents a current struggle, and that ties into future struggle with the time of the Antichrist. So, to put it simply, the Whore of Babylon represents the nation of Israel. And you might say that's an anti-Semitic statement. It's not. I'm all for Israel, the nation, the people, and their well-being, but not from my mouth, but specifically from the mouth of God. It's spoken so many times. The nation of Israel as a whole has turned away from God. They do not follow him. And a lot of people will say, no, they follow God, but it's all a matter of perspective, and really nobody can say but God. I'm just saying, according to the Bible, the nation of Israel has turned away from God, and for that reason, they are in the struggles that they currently have. For instance, actually, let's go ahead and get into here. Here's the first instance that you'll see where I'm right about this. So after the exodus from Egypt, the Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years because of their sin, because immediately they wanted to go back to Egypt. God saved them when they were grumbling about leaving, or about the captivity. They were saved, and wandering around, even though they were protected. Even it says even their shoes and their clothes never withered over 40 years miraculously, but they still complained and wanted to go back. So Moses and Aaron die. The power goes to Joshua, and Joshua is to lead the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, into the promised land, which was inhabited by the ancient Canaanites at that point. And the land itself was basically all of the Middle East, and there were a lot of different areas of the land to each of the tribes of Israel. Other than the Levites, they didn't have a tribe. Their lot was to worship God. So in every place, every land, they had a temple where they would live, and then this is where tithing would come in. People would tithe to the church, to the synagogue where the Levites lived, because they didn't have work. They weren't allowed to work. They had to worship, and they had to sacrifice for the people on a daily basis. So if tithing wasn't happening, they literally were not eating and would die. So in doing this, in coming to conquer the land, God told them, there are people here already, and I've set the land for you. They will come against you. You need to fight these people, eliminate them, and do not let any of them survive. You might think, oh, this is horrible. Why would God do that? Oh, he's so mean. He's so mean. Yeah, if you know anything about anthropology, regardless of whether or not there was any religion in a culture in ancient times, there was nothing but war. People fought over land constantly as the human race was really coming into its territorial situation. So it didn't matter if they were being led by God or not. God was not interfering with the world. He was interfering with the nation of Israel because of the promise that he made to Abraham. So the promise he made, he would protect these people who didn't have a home, these people who were not trained in war. Yes, he would protect these people and put them in a land where they could be safe. And these people who came against them were warriors, people who had fought to get their lands. And for the most part, the Israelites, they had the favor of God to do this. I think they conquered 3 lands worth, three nations, three tribes worth of nations, and then they got very lax about it, and they stopped. Once Joshua died, they stopped conquering the lands, and they started just inhabiting the lands where those people live. So in this case, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's what they should have done. And God explicitly said, don't do that. Why? Because these people would be a thorn in your side, and it has been since. If you look into the narrative, the whole situation with Esther being king or queen over in Persia, and Mordecai trying to kill the Israelite people. Mordecai was a descendant of one of those people who were let go, who were allowed to live. Constantly, you see generations in the future, the people of Israel denied God, or didn't do what he said, and it came to bite not them specifically, but their children's children's children. And it's just, God knows best because he knows the end from the beginning, right? So they really had no reason to object or to not do what he says. So one of the things that you see when they first come into the land of Israel, the nation, the nation that they never fully conquered, God tells them, I'm bringing you to a nation, a place with 7 nations greater than you are, and that sit on 7 hills. You might see where I'm going with this, because it's exactly where I'm going with this. If you look in the book of Revelation, at this point where the dragon with 7 heads and the 7 crowns is described, it's John asks, what does this mean? What does this represent? And regarding the dragon, he's told the 7 heads represent 7 nations, or 7 nations, and they what was it? It represented 7 nations, or 7 tongues, 7 people. and it's the land on which the Whore of Babylon sits. So it's not a literal dragon. It's the symbolic representation of the dragon, which represents the devil, evil, right? And the 7 heads represent 7 lands, 7 people, and the whore herself represents another people who are in this land where 7 other nations are, and really that only represents Israel, especially in today's age. If you go to Israel, you'll see, or you can look it up online. I don't know if it'll really come out, but if you ever go to Jerusalem, which is where the Israelite people, the nation of Judah, eventually rested, it's literally like giant hills. The Mount of Olives is one. Zion is that Jerusalem, old city Jerusalem, is on a hill. It's just giant hills. It's really the only way to describe it, on which there are cities, like entire cities that you can see from the top of any hill. And this is the land where the people of Israel had to go and fight against these kings. So when you see the story of Joshua, where they're fighting an army, and then another king sees them, and then he comes down and starts fighting against them, and then another king sees them, and then they came down and start fighting. It's because of the way the geography is, and it's legitimate. And if it wasn't legitimate, well, then the account of this battle would not line up with the geography of the land. And this was written, thousands of years ago. So the land clearly hasn't changed that much. So there's that. The dragon represents not the nation of Israel, but the land on which the Israelites rested, and the people themselves. There's also a list of those nations in the book of Joshua, where Joshua says these are the people we have to go and conquer. Of course, they didn't conquer them all. So why do I think that the whore of Babylon represents the nation of Israel, the whore who is drunk on the blood of the saints? Seems sacrilegious, I guess, if you're Catholic, or it seems sacrilegious if you're a Hebrew or a Jew, an Israelite, and I suppose it could be, but it doesn't change the fact that this is not a concept that's new to the New Testament. If it were just in the New Testament, I might be like, okay, well, maybe this is grounds for considering. Maybe this is not a canon book, or is not officially part of the Bible. Maybe somebody wrote this. But as you see in everything that I talk about here, it's corroborated elsewhere in the Bible and multiple times. So this actually does exist in the Old Testament. She's not called the Whore of Babylon, but you'll see in the books that I describe, or that I put down in the references, God himself, like this is not the words of a prophet giving suggestions. This is the Lord says, the nation of Israel is seen in his eyes as a whore, and he calls his sister Samaria, of course the land, is also a whore, but she is less to blame in her actions than the nation of Israel. And Samaria is also referenced as the land where Sodom and Gomorrah is, or was. And God specifically states in the end times, in judgment, when he comes to judge the nations, he says specifically this: it would be better for Sodom and Gomorrah than for the Israelites, for the nation of Israelites in that day. And that's saying something, because Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. There's nothing left of Sodom and Gomorrah, to the point where people don't believe it ever existed. That's how badly it was destroyed. And God is saying, I judged them in that instant. But when I come to judge all the nations, and I resurrect everyone from the dead, and I judge the nations, it's going to be way better for Sodom and Gomorrah than it will for the Israelite, for my people. And if God is saying that, then that you've got to really consider they screwed up somewhere, and they screwed up big. And the reality is they did. Throughout the entire Old Testament, you see constantly God tries to save them from themselves, and they reject and refuse him. The biggest thing that they did, their biggest sin, called out multiple times again, is that they chose a man to be king over them, a flawed human being with sin to be king over them, and flatly rejected God the Father from being king over them. And they said, this decision be on us and our children. That was their response when they were when God tried to convince them otherwise, when the prophet tried to convince them otherwise. And ironically enough, they said the exact same thing when they crucified Jesus. And Pilate said, I find no fault in this man. And they're like, crucify him. And he's like, would you crucify your king? And they said, his blood be on us and our children. They are their father's sons. Yes, the nation of Israel is referred to by the Father, never by the prophets, by the Father himself multiple times, to be whores, and horribly treating their own people. Moreover, you look at the saints, this cup with the blood of the saints, drunk on the blood of the saints. Jesus himself. So we're not even going to go into the fact that you can read any story in the Bible about the prophets and how the Israelite people persecuted their own prophets to death. But because of, the prophets always showed up with bad news. God said this is going to disappear. It's going to be destroyed if you don't change your ways. Jesus himself says a couple of times, which of your fathers did not kill the saints? Jesus himself, who is God, pointed out to the Pharisees that the blood and the responsibility for the blood of every saint and every prophet rests on the Israelite people. So who else could be drunk on the blood of the saints? Only Israel. Israel is the whore of Babylon. What does that mean? It means nothing in terms of like the Antichrist, as far as like we're not expecting that Israel is some evil nation with an ulterior motive. No, they are just very, very fallen from God, and as a result, their punishment will arrive. So further in the prophecy, with the prophetic vision, the whore of Babylon is abused by other nations, and she goes to try and seek help from the people that she thought were her lovers, and she finds no help whatsoever. And this is a reference to the destruction of Israel during the tribulation, or after the 3.75 years of the tribulation, where the Antichrist tries to destroy the nation of Israel. They find no help. And it's at that point where they're on the brink of utter destruction, the complete eradication of the Israelite people, that Jesus himself, clouds open up, or sky opens up, clouds reveal Jesus and his angels. He comes down, sets everything straight. That is what this is talking about, the whore of Babylon. It's just a revelation for you to realize we should not be deifying the nation of Israel, and in fact we should be pitying the nation of Israel because of their plight. We see even now how they're worshiping essentially Donald Trump for simply recognizing the nation or the land of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the place where God chose to be the capital for the nation of Israel. Any Christian would believe that anyways. We already accepted that. But the fact that Donald Trump said it, another leader, they're literally deifying him and putting him on the back of the new coins, the 10 shekel coins that's going to be coming out. They're naming the train after him, and they're probably honestly going to start talks for the third temple. But as far as who the Antichrist will be, we'll see when that temple is actually sanctioned, and when peace talks start happening. Because then, of course, you'll know once they've built the temple, whoever's the leader at that time will go and sit in that temple and claim to be God. And Antichrist, get out, go and find a nice place to hide in the mountains, because that's what we're going to have. So the whore of Babylon, nation of Israel. The dragon with the 7 heads on whom she sits, with the 7 crowns, that represents the actual land itself on which she sits. The 7 waters, I'm pretty sure there's a section about that. 7 hills, 7 waters. The water represents the people, the tongue, meaning that each of the heads each of the hills, the nations, they're not the same people. They're different tongues, and they were. And I'm not sure if they are now still, but the land certainly is still there. But it's really just a reference. It's a symbolic pointer that if anyone who's watching would notice, this represents the nation of Israel, because no other land in the world is like that, and no other nation is set like a queen on top of this land other than the nation of Israel. They were literally taken in their infancy when they were a people who were enslaved, and they were dressed, and they were given riches, and they were sent off to a land where they could live and be with their God. And they abandoned him, which is why God references Israel as a whore who has left her first love, because this is essentially what they've done to the Father, to God, their God, and in murdering all their saints and the prophets and Jesus, God, who came to be a human as they've wanted to rule over them, who is also God. They have made themselves drunk on the blood of their saints, and no one in the entire world can claim the death of the saints for their own other than the Israelite people. And you might say, well, today people are dying everywhere for Christianity. Yeah, that's for Christianity, but this is something different. This is the prophets that God the Father sent to the Israelite people. Every single one of them they've killed. So that's really it. That's all there is to the Whore of Babylon and that mystery, which is no longer a mystery. The Whore of Babylon represents Israel. The dragon represents that nation. Just to give you a pointer, again, that's in Joshua, book of Joshua, or Exodus, right before it. And it's all really just a sad story, wrapped up in how the nation of Israel, all of their suffering is due to their decisions, and how it will continue to be so until they are almost completely destroyed and Jesus shows up to save them, right after they choose to recognize the error of their ways and the fact that Jesus is God, who he said he is. So if you like this information, I encourage you to like, subscribe, share. More than anything, talk about this with people, especially other Christian people. Anyone who is in the church that you know, your friends, your family, people who don't believe in the Bible. Ask people, consider whether or not it makes sense to the biblical narrative, because it does. Read the references I've put in. Each of these references will point you to exactly what you're looking for as far as the information, and you can judge for yourself whether or not the information is valid. And other than that, that's I guess next time. I'm not sure what we'll talk about, but I've got some ideas, and so we'll pick one and we'll just jump right in. It'll stay on the topic of end times until we're done with that, and maybe we'll get into some more biblical history and take it on a little more granularly. So thanks again for listening, and have a good one.